Welcome to the classic album Deep Dive. This episode, I will be diving deeply into the murky waters surrounding the evolution of Motley Crue's debut album, Too Fast for Love. Disclaimer that I've researched the album and band intensively. There are certain comments that I will make that are my assumptions and my assumptions only based on the aforesaid research. Here we go. Too Fast for Love was released in November of 81. It only charted at 77 on Billboard, nowhere else. Right, let's get it out of the way first. There are many cliches here. Never judge a book by its cover. Appearances can be deceptive. You get the picture. And I know for some, it's not a particularly appetizing one. The hair, the spandex, the heels, the makeup, the fact that at least two of them were prettier than your girlfriend. There were many obstacles to get over with Motley Crue's 1981 offering before the needle ever hit vinyl. But if you could get past the cover, this is undoubtedly a classic album. So let's journey back in time and see what the hell was going on. Motley Crue, going into recording Too Fast for Love, were basically, how shall I put this? A clusterfuck of tremendous proportions. How they survived to actually record that album is a miracle. Their everyday routine of heavy drug taking, heavy drinking, was already totally out of control. Vince Neil described their average day thus, quote, would get drunk, do crazy amounts of cocaine, walk the circuit in stiletto heels, stumbling all over the place, end quote. Tell me about it, Vince. Stilettos are hard enough to walk in when you're sober. So I'm told. Occasionally, it seems, they would stumble into playing an actual gig. And 9 times out of 10, that would end up in a free-for-all. The band members would routinely enter into physical altercations with the police, itinerant bikers, drag queens, their own girlfriends. In fact, any group of people numbering more than 2. There were even rumours that Vince Neil got the shit kicked out of him by a passing dinner lady, but they are totally unsubstantiated. They were, though, a staggering car crash. In reality, penniless squatters, in their own heads, already the rock stars they wanted to be. But to give them credit, or at least one of them credit, they were under no illusions about the way they looked or the way they acted. Bass player SIXX described them as, quote, 4 male degenerates dressed like female sluts, end quote. SIXX again, once we took clothes from a homeless girl. There were no taboos. I even tried to fuck Tommy's mother, end quote. Right, Genesis they're not, but there is always one who had a plan, who drove the band, who finally made things happen. Bassist NIKKI SIXX. Tom Zutaut, mispronounced, who would later sign them to Elektra, remembers the early meetings. Quote, Tommy fidgeted madly, he just couldn't keep still. Mick became more demonic with each drink until he started hallucinating. Vince was usually fucking the waitress in the bathroom. NIKKI was the only one who took the meetings seriously. He had mapped out each step for the band's future in his head, end quote. But there was a lot of weird shit going on in that head. NIKKI SIXX was almost pathologically determined to succeed. At one point, to gain notoriety, he had started to set himself on fire on stage. 9 times out of 10, deliberately. I quote, I didn't give a shit about the pain. I would have swallowed tacks or fucked a broken bottle if it would have brought more people to our shows. End quote. Not sure it would. Well, not the right people, anyway. But it was this determination of Mr. SIXX to make it, and the willingness of the others to go along with whatever he came up with, that eventually, in spite of their damaged personas and hedonistic lifestyle, eventually got them noticed. And on one level, even the extreme look could have been a part of the plan. NIKKI SIXX knew that he had the songs, literally because he'd already written most of them, but he also knew he needed to match their impact with a sort of extreme visuals that could carry it off. I'm not sure if all, or even any of the band, were happy to look like that, because that look sure as hell stopped when they'd made it. But NIKKI SIXX knew that Motley Crue had to stand out from the denim and leather metal acts or the recently imposed bob cut eyelinered new wave acts, yuck, that were currently dominating the LA club circuit. Eventually he got Motley Crue to the point where they were selling out certain clubs. The High Spot 3 consecutive sold out shows at the infamous Whiskey. And that was enough to get them a sort of manager with a construction worker called Alan. Alan Kaufman loaned them the money to record the first album as an advance on their future ticket sales. Now, I don't know if Alan was as rattled and out of it as the band themselves, because old Al was really taking a chance with these guys. For the most part, they were a staggering wound of dysfunction held together with cocaine tourniquets. Anything could and would happen. I mean, you wouldn't want to put these guys under the microscope, would you? Oh, let's. Vince Neil primarily landed the job of vocalist solely because the former singer refused to take his gloves off for a clap-along backing track. I.e., Vince Neil wasn't in Motley Crue because he could sing. I think from day one, NIKKI SIXX thought his lack of range could be a problem. If you wanted falsetto, Vince was your man. If you wanted anything else, Vince probably wasn't your man. He was in Motley Crue primarily because he could work a crowd, for or against the band. It really didn't matter. Vince was the loose cannon Motley Crue needed as their frontman. But loose cannons are inherently chaotic, and repeated personal clashes between NIKKI SIXX and Neil, exasperated by Neil's extremely heavy drug taking, led to Motley Crue actually rehearsing in secret with the Rat vocalist Stephen Pearcy, and then offering him the job, which, probably seeing the degenerate circus in front of him, he declined. Guitarist Mick Mars, I believe, was probably at least 10 years older than anyone else. His ages have been bandied about as anything from 26 to early 30s. I would tend to go with the latter. But he was therefore a seasoned musician, and he knew his way around a fretboard. Admittedly, the simple, constrained material that SIXX wrote didn't give him a lot of space to show what he could do. But on his first meeting with the band, he was already sizing up his fellow bandmates. His thoughts on NIKKI SIXX were, and I quote, "I knew he was still young and musically naive, and I could influence him to evolve my way." End quote. His thoughts on drummer Tommy Lee were staggeringly short and to the point. He hit hard, his name was Tommy, and man, could he play. End quote. Vince Neil didn't appear to draw any early insight from him, though Neil himself believed that of all of them, Mick Mars was easily the strangest. According to Vince Neil, Mars would frequently send him notes saying he was going to kill him, and spent a lot of his leisure time biting Tommy Lee's nipples. But hey, he could play. Talking of which, Mr. Lee, swollen nipples or not, was a bit of a drumming prodigy, possibly even the best musician in the group, even at the tender age of 19. And finally, last and certainly least in the playing department came NIKKI SIXX himself. Musicianship, not great. And of course there was the statement years later from Bob Rock that SIXX told him that he didn't actually play on Motley's early albums. Now Rock later recanted on that, and I believe personally that he simply misheard NIKKI SIXX. What he probably said was that he couldn't remember playing on their early records. Whatever, as they entered the studio to record Too Fast for Love, I believe of all people it was Tommy Lee who summed up the state of the band with quite brutal honesty. He described Vince Neil's voice as squeaky and high-pitched. He thought NIKKI SIXX's bass playing was ratty and out of time. He thought Mick Mars's guitar was constantly over-amped, and that his own drumming was way, way too busy. And he was right. So, they recorded their debut album for anything from $3,000 to $6,000 and knocked it out in 3 drunken, drug-fueled days. I've never heard the original, but it sold 20,000 copies simply through word of mouth, and that was enough to get Elektra interested. The band signed. It was sort of through the back door, which would later come back to bite them, and mixer of the moment Roy Thomas Baker was brought in to dispense a bit of remixed Tough Love. And I'm guessing, with a strong whisper in his ear from a largely disgruntled record company that they actually had Crew on their roster in the first place, Too Fast for Love really did get the works. Whole songs were removed, certain of the tracks that did make it were significantly shortened. Reputedly, the band were far from happy with this new polished result, said it sounded too clean, that the album had been screwed by removing its rawness. Anyway, Elektra put the record out, and then in Tom Zatoot's own words, quote, "It was a disaster. Elektra were putting all their money and hopes behind Aussie band Cold Chisel. Nobody was going to promote Motley Crue." End quote. But Too Fast for Love still sold another 100,000 copies through word of mouth, and then things changed for the better behind the scenes. Tom Werman became new head of A&R, and he was crazy about the band, so they were now a priority of sorts, and Doug McGee crawled onto the scene, literally coughing money, determined to make Crew, in his own words, the biggest band in the world. And we all know how it went from there. And now on to the album. Too Fast for Love contained 9 songs, 9 bullets, 9 explosive combinations of glam metal, punk, pop that literally had never been done before. No one had released anything like this. Other bands had pushed out diluted versions in the past. We know where NIKKI SIXX was coming from. The New York Dolls, Johnny Thunders, the Stooges, and from the UK, The Sweet. On a side note, while in previous Outfit London, SIXX had reputedly been devastated when he had actually sent Sweet vocalist Brian Connolly some of his demos, songs which would eventually end up on Too Fast for Love, and been told in no uncertain terms by Mr. Connolly not to give up his day job. Well, Mr. Connolly got it wrong, because every track on Too Fast for Love is an anthemic nail gun to the head. For the most part, this record absolutely hammers along. Mind you, it had to. Either Tommy Lee would probably have stuck in another fill. And this is a real record. It contains very few overdubs. On Take Me to the Top, Vince Neil screams, "Take me to the top and throw me over." And that says it all. All killer, no filler. Consequently, out of the 9 studio albums Crew have released, I would put this easily at number 1. Do you agree? Do you think it's their best record? Let's face it, there's not a lot of competition. Or have I got that wrong? Do you have a problem with their look on this record? Did it put you off? Or do you agree with me that it could have been part of the plan? And is it always wrong to suck another man's nipples? Please let me know in your comments. Please smash a like, subscribe, because it all helps me with my irritable bowel.